On November the 18th, 1946, just before 10 at night, Staff Sergeant Michael Chen stood in the stone corridor of a Catholic orphanage outside Rosenheim and refused to let the visiting hour end. The sisters had already told him the children were asleep and the doors were closed. He stayed anyway, cap under his arm, breath visible in the cold, until the last footsteps of other visitors faded into the stairwell. The result was that the woman who ran the place came for him herself. The cost was that he began as an intruder in someone else's house. Sister Margaret did not argue in the hallway. She turned, led him past dark dormitory doors, and opened her office as if opening a ledger. A small stove gave the only heat. A low lamp made long shadows on the stone. The building creaked as if it were exhaling. She motioned to a chair but did not sit until he did, setting the rhythm and forcing him to follow it. The result was a room that felt like a court without a judge's robe. The cost was that every move he made would be read as character. Michael set a thin packet on her desk, a partially completed adoption request, and a small notebook worn at the corners. He started without greetings because he was afraid that warmth would turn into pleading. Sister Margaret did not touch the papers. She poured weak tea, placed the cup near his hand, and watched him over the rim as if waiting for him to betray himself with gratitude. The result was a demand disguised as courtesy. The cost was that he could not hide behind forms. He had to speak first. He told her what he wanted in plain English, to adopt one of her boys and take him to the United States. He named the child Klaus and watched her face for the smallest shift. She asked why that one, the silent boy who did not charm visitors, the one who made adults feel useless. Michael said the boy had spoken once, only 2 words, and that those words had lodged in him like shrapnel. The result was that the conversation moved from procedure to motive. The cost was that motives were where men lied best, and she listened like someone trained to hear the lie inside a confession. She opened the packet just enough to see the blank spaces that mattered and shut it again. "Married?" she asked. "No," he said. She did not react with disgust, only with calculation, and she wrote nothing down yet. The result was that he became, in her eyes, an unmarried soldier with an interest in a child. The cost was that the frame invited caution before it invited hope. Sister Margaret did not accuse him of anything he could deny. She asked where he would be when the boy woke, shaking in the dark, and could not be soothed by words. Michael answered that his family in San Francisco owned a small grocery and lived above it, that there would be rooms and hands and routines, that his mother would keep the lights on even when the world outside was mean. The result was a picture of stability offered across an ocean. The cost was that pictures were cheap, and she had buried children who had once believed in them. She pressed harder. Soldiers were moved, reassigned, discharged, or sent back across the Atlantic with a signature, and children did not survive on signatures. Michael said he had already begun the steps to leave the army or transfer into civilian work, and he said it knowing it sounded like bribery. The result was a sacrifice placed on the desk with the tea. The cost was that sacrifice proved desperation as well as commitment, and desperation frightened her more than indifference. Sister Margaret finally picked up her pen and made a small note in the margin of his form. The scratch was quiet, but it meant he had not been refused. She asked for specifics, how long the process would take, what authority would approve it, what he would do if the army delayed him. The result was that the interrogation became technical: plans, contingencies, proof. The cost was that each answer created a new place for him to fail. Michael answered as cleanly as he could. If discharge was delayed, he would accept a stateside posting, a reduction, any assignment that brought him home. He would not ask the boy to wait in limbo while he chased paperwork. If he was forced to wait, his family would take custody and care day to day while he followed as fast as orders allowed. The result was redundancy built into the promise. The cost was that redundancy admitted risk, and a child like Klaus recognized risk as the first step toward abandonment. Sister Margaret did not argue about the army. She argued about time. She said children like Klaus did not have spare months to test a man's sincerity, because a child could learn not to expect comfort, and that lesson could become permanent. Michael felt his throat tighten because she was naming what he feared. The result was that her skepticism sounded like mercy. The cost was that he could not dismiss her. He had to defeat her while agreeing with her. She shifted from his plans to her power. She said she could call his commanding officer, verify his story, and then decide in the morning. She said haste often wore the mask of impulse, and impulse created orphans faster than war. The result was a delay offered as wisdom. The cost was that Michael knew delay was a decision because morning was already moving toward him. He let his silence hang just long enough to show he understood the danger, then chose the truth he had been carrying like contraband. He told her, quietly, that morning was too late. When she asked how he could know that, he said he had seen a transfer list, and Klaus's name was on it for dawn. The result was that the room cooled as if the stove had died. The cost was that he had placed forbidden knowledge on her desk, and honest people often turned away from forbidden things. Sister Margaret's pen stopped. She asked where he had seen the list, and her voice was soft in a way that meant she could already see the consequences. Michael felt the trap close. Answer and confess misconduct, refuse and look like a liar. He paid for honesty by giving it in full. He said he had seen it in an office he had no right to enter, in a file cabinet drawer left open by habit. The result was a truth sharp enough to cut him. The cost was that Sister Margaret looked at him with disappointment, as if he had dragged mud into a chapel. He did not try to clean himself. He said he would accept punishment if it kept the boy from becoming a number in a holding center. He offered to put the admission in writing, to sign his name to it the same way he was asking to sign his name to Klaus. The result was that he turned shame into leverage. The cost was that leverage could snap back and break his career. A careful knock came at the door. A younger sister, Agnes, slipped in just enough to whisper in German. Sister Margaret's eyes flicked to Michael's stripes and back, and she dismissed Agnes with a gesture that demanded silence. The result was a reminder that time outside the office had not stopped. The cost was that Michael understood he had started motion he could not see, and motion drew attention. When Agnes left, Sister Margaret told him that rule-breaking proved her point. Men broke lines when they wanted something. Michael did not excuse himself. He asked her to judge the full shape of what he was willing to endure to keep the boy from disappearing, and he asked her to judge it tonight, not after dawn had carried the child away. The result was that her condemnation paused. The cost was that she moved the test upward from one night's courage to years of consequences. Sister Margaret's next questions came like a second front. She said she had seen soldiers arrive with gifts and leave with stories, and she had watched children learn to smile for those stories because smiling improved their chances of being chosen. She said she would not let Klaus be trained into performing gratitude for a stranger's mercy. The result was an accusation without the word crime. The cost was that Michael had to prove he was not choosing a child the way men chose souvenirs. He opened his worn notebook and pushed it across the desk. Inside were dates and brief observations, flinches at sudden noise, food hidden in pockets, a habit of pressing his back to a wall, the exact hour he finally accepted a sip of water without staring at the cup as if it might vanish. Michael did not present the notes as expertise, only as proof that he had sat and watched without demanding performance. The result was credibility built from time rather than charm. The cost was that Sister Margaret could see how deeply he had already entered the boy's life, which made his request more serious and therefore more frightening. She asked about the nightmares. She described them with the restraint of someone who had learned that horror did not need ornament. Waking, trembling, no words, eyes wide, hands locked as if still gripping an invisible rail. The result was that Michael realized how little of Klaus he had truly seen. The cost was that his promise now had a darker shape, and he could not pretend otherwise. Michael admitted he had not witnessed the worst nights. He described the days instead: a dropped tray that froze the boy, a slammed door that turned him into stone, the way he approached by lowering himself and offering bread without insisting. He said he had learned to count victories in inches, not miles. The result was a portrait of patience under constraint. The cost was that Sister Margaret's next question landed cleanly. Would patience survive a decade with no gratitude? Michael said he did not need gratitude and did not want it. He said that if he were seeking gratitude, he would choose another child, one who hugged visitors and cried in ways adults understood. The result was a refusal of the easiest reward. The cost was that refusing reward meant accepting loneliness, and loneliness could rot into resentment unless anchored by something harder than pride. Sister Margaret moved to identity. Klaus had been baptized. The orphanage had given him a stable map, prayers, routines, a language for suffering that did not require explanation. She asked what would happen to that map in a Chinese household, and whether taking him away would become another kind of confiscation. The result was an accusation that love might become erasure. The cost was that Michael had to answer without attacking her faith or selling his family short. He offered a plan instead of a sermon. He said Klaus would have access to church if he wanted it, that he would not be mocked for belief, and that Sister Margaret would receive regular letters about the boy's life. He said he would accept questions and answer them because secrecy was what had broken the boy in the first place. The result was respect turned into obligation. The cost was that Michael tied himself to scrutiny that could follow him across an ocean. Silence returned, heavy with the stove's slow clicks. Sister Margaret said she had watched too many promises break. She had seen children handed to authorities with stamps and signatures and return months later thinner and quieter, as if the system had sanded them down until they stopped resisting. The result was her skepticism revealed as experience, not temperament. The cost was that experience made her harder to persuade because she was guarding a wound as well as a building. Michael used the only leverage he had left, the reality she could observe. He said she did not have to trust the occupation authorities and she did not have to trust his charm. He asked her to trust what she could see, what he did in this room, and what he was willing to sign. The result was a narrower target for judgment. The cost was that his body and decisions became the only evidence he could offer, and bodies and decisions failed. Sister Margaret leaned back and asked the question that cut through every argument. Why Klaus, not another child? There were 43 children here. Some were younger and easier and would attach quickly. Some would make him look good. The result was the cruelty of fairness. To choose one meant refusing the rest. The cost was that Michael felt the weight of every child he could not carry, and he had to answer anyway. Before he could, Agnes returned with reluctance in her posture. Sister Margaret told her to bring Klaus to the doorway, gently, and not into the room. The result was a test that did not rely on rhetoric. The cost was that it used a child as the instrument, and any harm would stain them all. Footsteps approached, light and uneven. Agnes appeared, and behind her Klaus moved like gravity had been turned up. He stopped at the threshold and kept his eyes low, scanning stone as if it could shift into traps. The result was a clear fact. The boy's silence was strategy, not stubbornness. The cost was that Michael felt the arrogance of expecting trust as payment for paperwork. A pop from the stove sounded too sharp in the small space. Klaus jerked, shoulders tight, breath shallow, hands clenching as if to keep himself from falling apart. Agnes whispered his name and tried to coax him forward. He did not move. The result was a freeze that threatened to become panic. The cost was that Sister Margaret could interpret the reaction as proof that Michael's plan would hurt the boy. Michael did not step toward him. He sat back, made his body smaller, and set his cap on the floor as if removing one more badge of authority. He spoke softly, using a few German words and then a calm English cadence, offering the boy a choice. Stay at the doorway or leave. The result was a measurable change. Klaus did not flee, and his breathing eased by a fraction. The cost was time, and time was what the transfer list was stealing. Sister Margaret asked whether Michael understood what he had just witnessed. Could he do that every day, when tired, angry, frightened, or alone, without turning the boy's fear into a personal insult? The result was that the test shifted from technique to endurance. The cost was that Michael could not answer with poetry. He needed structure. He said he could not guarantee love, speech, or gratitude. He said he could guarantee that he would not punish the boy for being wounded and would not make affection a debt. He said he would rather be unloved than become the next adult Klaus learned to fear. The result was a promise shaped like restraint, not conquest. The cost was that restraint offered no comfort to the rescuer, only responsibility. Sister Margaret's last door waited behind one sentence. She asked again why it had to be Klaus. Michael looked at the boy's hands, still clenched as if holding on to nothing, and answered with the only motive he trusted. He said other children still reached. Klaus did not. Klaus had begun to live as if the stone walls were the whole world, and Michael could not accept a 7-year-old deciding that loneliness was permanent. The result was a motive grounded in observation rather than heroism. The cost was that the motive was personal enough to be dismissed as fixation, and he had to accept that risk to speak the truth. Sister Margaret's gaze moved from Michael to the doorway. Klaus had not come closer, but he had not run. She touched the cross at her chest as if checking that it was still there, then looked back at Michael with tired precision. She said she was tired of watching children pay for adult weakness. The result was not consent, but a crack in the ice. The cost was that whatever came next would demand a price so high that only a fool or a committed man would pay it. Sister Margaret pulled a blank sheet from her desk drawer and began to write. The pen scratched, the stove crackled, the building held its breath. Michael watched her hand and realized she was drafting an oath, not a recommendation. The result was that the gate began to open while being reinforced. The cost was that passage would come with chains. She slid the paper toward him and told him to read. It was short and brutal. She would support the initiation of adoption procedures for Klaus only if Michael pledged never to return the boy to an institution and never to abandon him to the administrative machinery that had already failed him. He must provide an address, write regularly, and accept that she could contact the church in his city if the boy vanished. The result was love converted into enforceable duty. The cost was that Michael could not sign it as a gesture. He had to sign it as a sentence. Michael read it twice and saw the future inside it. Sleepless nights, a boy who might never call him father, the slow corrosion of fatigue. He looked up and met her eyes, then wrote his name and service number without bargaining. He added his family address in San Francisco, and he wrote it carefully as if the ink itself could become a tether. The result was a commitment that could be traced. The cost was that traceability meant accountability, and accountability meant there would be no quiet retreat if he collapsed. Sister Margaret signed beneath his name, stamped the paper with the orphanage seal, and placed it into the packet. The result was the first barrier crossed, the gatekeeper's consent, conditional but real. The cost was that she now carried risk too. If she was wrong, she would have delivered a child into another kind of ruin. A louder knock sounded at the front door, the knock of someone who expected compliance. Agnes returned, pale, speaking quickly in German. Michael caught only one word he feared: transfer. The result was confirmation that the list was real and the system had arrived early. The cost was that there was no time left for reflection. They reached the entrance hall and found Lieutenant Harris beneath the crucifix, breath visible in the cold air that rushed in with him. He held a clipboard and spoke as if reciting a schedule. He said he was here for the children on the morning transfer list and that the convoy would not wait for sentiment. The result was a collision between personal promise and institutional routine. The cost was that routine did not recognize love as a category. Harris's eyes paused on Michael's uniform. He asked what a staff sergeant was doing here at this hour. Michael stepped forward and said he was here on a personal matter and had paperwork. The result was Harris's skepticism, focused like a searchlight. The cost was that any hint of misconduct would now be weighed by an officer who could report it. Sister Margaret opened the packet to the stamped oath and told Harris that Klaus was under a pending placement and would not be transferred as a number. Harris frowned at the seal as if it were an inconvenience and said the order came from above the orphanage and above the church. The result was legal friction, brief but real. The cost was that friction invited force. Harris asked for the child's full name and age, then tapped his clipboard as if the paper could win by being tapped. Michael raised the oath sheet and said removing Klaus now would violate an active placement decision supported by the orphanage director. The result was a shift in liability. The decision stopped being routine and became contested. The cost was that Michael put himself directly in the path of retaliation by blocking paper with paper. Harris asked the question Michael had been dreading: how had he known to be here tonight? Michael felt Sister Margaret's judgment beside him, still sharp, and chose the boldest honesty he could survive. He said he had seen the list by accident in an office where his unit delivered documents and had come because he did not believe the system would protect the boy's best interest. The result was a confession shaped like a justification. The cost was immediate. Harris's face tightened, and Michael knew he had just handed Harris ammunition for a report. Sister Margaret did not defend his method. She told Harris she did not care how the soldier had learned of the transfer. She cared that a child would be removed from a stable placement for convenience. She said she would put her own name on the record and her own seal on the objection. The result was a moral witness placed beside a legal claim. The cost was that if she lost, she would have antagonized the very administrators who controlled the orphanage's supplies. Harris weighed the packet in his hand as if feeling for a crack. He said he could not stop the convoy for an orphanage petition, but he admitted that removing a child under an active placement claim created complications. He said he would permit a temporary hold only if Michael assumed responsibility immediately and accompanied the child to processing at once. The result was a narrow, bureaucratic opening. The cost was a threat. If Michael's claim failed later, the consequences would not be theoretical. Michael took the opening and made it immediate. He said he would assume responsibility for Klaus at once, accompany every step and report to command when demanded. The result was a delayed decision turned into a present obligation. Take the risk now, in front of witnesses. The cost was that he tied his military career to a child's file in a way his superiors would hate, and he did it with his eyes open. Sister Margaret stepped close enough that only Michael could hear her. She told him signing was not the end of his promise, and if he ever tried to return the boy to the system, she would find him and she would write until someone listened. The result was the oath tightened into a personal threat. The cost was that Michael felt the promise close around him like a collar, and he accepted it because he needed a harness more than comfort. Agnes brought Klaus into the hall, wrapped in a blanket too large for him, eyes wide with confusion. The boy's gaze flicked from Harris's clipboard to Michael's uniform to Sister Margaret's tight mouth. The result was that Klaus saw authority gathering and could not know what it meant. The cost was that movement, even approved movement, could feel like betrayal. Michael knelt and held his hands open as he had before. He did not say father. He did not say home. He said Klaus's name and said they were leaving with Sister Margaret's permission, and he waited for the boy's eyes to settle before he moved. The result was a small thread of meaning. Permission meant fewer surprises. The cost was that even permission could not erase fear. It could only keep fear from turning into panic. Klaus looked to Sister Margaret. She touched his shoulder, brief and steady, and whispered a short blessing in German. The result was the only farewell he received that night, anchored in routine. The cost was that routine was being broken anyway, and blessings did not keep paperwork from biting. Michael stood, adjusted the blanket without pulling the boy close like a prize, and turned toward the door. Cold air and fine snow rushed in, stinging his nose. The result was a night that looked peaceful, and was not. The cost was that peace could hide how fragile the next hour would be, and fragility was what the system exploited. He stepped into the snow carrying a child, a stamped promise, and the knowledge that the system would come back the moment he stumbled. Behind him, Sister Margaret watched from the doorway until darkness swallowed the shape of his uniform. The result was separation and a beginning. The cost was that the true test of the oath would not happen in this dramatic hour, but in all the ordinary nights to come, when no one was watching and Klaus still might not speak.